Welcome to Mamaroneck Library. Whenever I get the chance to meet an author, I always remember something unique that she or he has said so that I can bring it to a book group conversation. When I first met Amy, she introduced herself to me as a geek. Well, Amy, who is very modest, is actually a lot more than that. I have to read this part because the list is so long. Amy is a national spokeswoman, writer, and expert on helping women and girls advance and succeed. She is a graduate of Cornell University and the NYU Stern School of Business. She is a former Wall Street executive. She is currently president and co-founder of the New Agenda, which is a national organization that works on women's issues. The inclusive list is so long, I'm not going to read it all. A lot of you know me. I didn't introduce myself. My name, or if you don't know me, you've spoken to me certainly. My name is Lori Friedley, and I'm head of adult reference here at Mamaroneck Public Library. And this is the important part. Librarians are invested in bringing quality information to their communities. We hold freedom of information dear to our hearts. Alternative facts scare us. I'll repeat that one. Alternative facts scare us. Yes. Appropriately, the subheading on the front of the cover of the lists read, "Experts in authoritarianism advise to keep a list of things subtly changing around you so you'll remember." So, to end, I am honored to pass the floor to Mamaroneck resident Amy Siskind, geek, like I told you, activist, blogger, podcaster, and chronicler extraordinaire, who will explain why she created the list, which I guarantee is one of the most important books you will read this year.
It's nice to be home. So thank you all for coming. I tend to find at my events, I have a lot of questions. So if this works, I'll speak for about 20 minutes about the list and why I started doing it and why I turned it into a book. And then we can have a discussion, because I'm sure you have a lot of things on your mind. So we'll do that for as long as time allows. So I woke up, as many of us did, on the morning after the 2016 election. I had a party at my house, which some of the people in this room were at. And we all had plans for our lives of what would happen after the election. Obviously, we were all shocked that night. And one of the things, and I'll read from one of the weeks in the books, are all the curious things that we've forgotten about the 2016 election itself, which is still subject, that I think over time more information will come out on. But what felt like that next morning, my daughter, who was a college student, texted me and said, this is, for all of she and her friends, the worst day in their lives since 9/11. And everybody was shocked, and as somebody who was involved politically and had at that point a leadership role of a women's organization, people were asking me, so what's next? And I had an inkling watching him and growing up as a Jewish American who was studied on the Holocaust and the uprise of Hitler, that things didn't feel right. And the things that particularly caught my attention when we waited for that shift after the election for him to become the person that won the election and the quote-unquote president for all people, is that shift never happened. And it was curious to me when he won the election, which no one expected, that he didn't have a typical platform or issues or agenda. It was really all about how he began his campaign with the Mexican rapist, that theme continued. And the interesting thing about the book and his campaign is Trump is exactly who he was in week 1 of my list as who he is in week 87. The man has not changed. What he did today with Germany in the early weeks of my list, Amy Klobuchar and John McCain and Lindsey Graham, when Lindsey Graham was the old Lindsey Graham, went to go assure our NATO allies because one of the first things Trump said was he wasn't sure we should be part of NATO. One of the first things he did after he took office, when there was a spike in hate crimes in the Southern Poverty Law Center in the first week, recorded 400 hate crimes, was to say we should grant understanding to others. And so just trip down memory lane, all the college hate crimes that we had in our schools, in our communities. The first Saturday that I did week 1 was the week that Mike Pence went to go see the cast of Hamilton, and Trump was attacking the cast of Hamilton. That morning he was attacking the New York Times. He was attacking SNL because he didn't like the skits. And just, in terms of what he was doing and the flames he was fanning, there was never that shift. And it felt to me very familiar and very scary. I started to read up on authoritarianism, and a lot of the themes and a lot of the things that the experts warned about were happening in our country. And one expert in particular, Sarah Kendzior, who wrote the foreword for my book, had an article, and I remember where I was on that Friday when I read it, talking about the importance of writing things down. She said, you write things down where you are today because you won't believe the things you're going to lose. And at the time, all these articles sounded very fantastical, like, oh, this can't possibly happen here. We're, a country steeped in democracy and everything's going to be fine. We have all these checks and balances, which gradually we've learned did not function when they needed. These were all norms, not laws. So that Saturday, after the first full week, and having read Sarah's article about the importance of writing things down, I went up to Valkill, which is a great trip if you haven't been. It's a little over an hour from here. And Eleanor Roosevelt, I grew up, she was always my North Star. I always heard about her from my mother. And I've been there so many times. A lot of times I bring Shep and Arlene up there, and we walked the trail where she walked with her Scottish Terriers. And I've been so many times at this point, I could probably give tours myself. But I needed some history that day, and I wanted to revisit Eleanor and what would Eleanor do in a situation like this. And one of the first things it says when you walk in to do the tour is her view that we the people are our government. We are our democracy. And those words were more powerful to me now than ever. And also she kept a daily column, My Day, where she wrote things down. So that night I went home and I decided to write week 1. And just to show you things in perspective, that night a New York Times reporter, and this is the image for week 1, had criticized his own paper's coverage and tweeted that. And I screenshot it to use for week 1. The next morning I woke up and it was gone, which I thought, wow, this isn't normal. But that's the image for week 1. So the first week had 9 items, and then the second week had 18 items. And by the time I got to week 5, we were into the 20s. And I had just been posting it at this point I did it on Medium, and then I would post it on Twitter and Facebook. For those of you who followed me early, I just did a screenshot. But by week 5, people said, oh, out of those 20, however many, I missed 5. Can you start to add source links? So that's when the lists start to become a little more sophisticated. And when we turned this into a book, we decided to leave it authentic to how it was, because this didn't start with any grand vision or plan. I was just that first night taking Sarah's advice and starting to write things down. Week 9 came, and that was the week of Meryl Streep's Golden Globe speech, where she didn't name Trump, but she talked about the person with disabilities that was a reporter that he mocked and what that said of our country and so on. That week, the list went viral. It had over 2 million views. And from then on, I started to get more serious about it. About a half year in, it was the summer a year ago, and even my kids were saying, oh my God, Mom, let someone else do this. This is such a pain in the neck. I was going on vacation. I was still on my computer. I was working every single day. But at that point, I realized last summer that nobody else was doing it, that other people had started to do it, had thought, abandon it. But I had already realized by the first half year that things were coming apart pretty quickly, which has only escalated. And about that time, I started to hear from a lot of publishers and agents, and I gave everyone the same message, which I could have cut and pasted. When this regime is out of power, we can turn it into a book. I just don't have time. At the time when I finished year one, I was spending about 20 hours a week on the list. That was when it was 120 items. Obviously, that seemed easy back then. There was an editor at Bloomsbury who had started to write to me in the spring of 2017. He kept writing to me, and I kept telling him the same thing. At one point, a woman came over to me at the gym, and she said, "Are you Amy Siskin?" And I said, "Yes." And she started yelling at me that I hadn't returned her sister-in-law's email. She happens to live in Larchmont and runs Bloomsbury. And Bloomsbury is very in front of me. And eventually, Anton wrote to me in November of 2017 and said, "By the way, the first 52 weeks are already a 400-page book." And this was at the same time net neutrality there was talk it was going to be repealed, which again was one of those things that the experts had warned about, that information would disappear or become less accessible. And you think at the time, oh, this could never happen, but gradually it was happening. So the idea of turning it into a book, I just said, you know what, this is the time to do it. I never thought it would be a big deal. I thought we would sell a few thousand copies, and at least it would be, worst case, if the internet disappeared as we knew it, or if the Library of Congress disappeared as we knew it, because this is being archived in the Library of Congress, at least it would be in book form. Now people joke, well, until they start burning books. And all this is very funny, except for it's not funny. So just, backing up a little bit before that, last summer, this time, I'd been writing for the right reporter in the right publication to sort of launch what I was doing, and Margaret Sullivan of the Washington Post wrote to me this time last year. Jackson and I were out doing college tours, and she said, "Can I interview you?" And so I happened to, we were at a school, and one of my friends was there who had a camera, so he took the picture that was in the Washington Post. And that was the first big article about what I was doing. And the first time I woke up the next morning and I was trending on Twitter, and I was like, holy shit. So then it was like really real. And it kind of went viral from there. And again, that was at the point last summer that somebody nominated it to be archived in the Library of Congress, and I heard from the Library of Congress last July. And so I think actually this week soon, because it takes a year for once they start crawling, the early lists from Medium are going to start to be visible at the Library of Congress archived. They also are going to be archiving the podcast, which I'll talk about shortly. As we approached the first year, I was doing videos at this point with Move On, and I remember one that we did last summer where I talked about Trump's strange affections for authoritarians and how he was distancing us from our allies, which I saw because it starts in the early weeks of the list. And I did this with Move On last summer, and they were all looking at me like, it's just, you see things, when you actually read the list and you're actually immersed in it, you can see these patterns developing. So that, and I had done other videos with them, and the woman who does my organization's website, Anelia, I said, maybe we should turn this into a formal website where we can have all the resources and everything, and actually formally buy pictures the way you were supposed to, since it's going in the Library of Congress. So in October of last year, we set out to do a Fund Me page to fund the cost of putting together a website. And a lot of people have been wanting to donate towards what I was doing, and I wanted this to be very grassroots, and I continue to want that, which is one of the reasons I was hesitant about doing a book. I didn't want people to think it was a commercial thing, which it is not. This was just about keeping history safe. But we decided to put it online, and this was the same time my organization, our foundation, was fundraising for our campus sexual assault run. So Anelia said, well, we shouldn't string it out for too long so it doesn't interfere with what our foundation's doing. And I said, I think that a lot of people want to donate, and I think we should keep it to a small cap, because this has to feel grassroots. So we set the cap at $25. We put it up, and within 5 minutes, we had raised $700. Mm-hmm. Within 24 hours, we had raised $20,000, and we were looking to raise 15, and we were trying to figure out how do we shut this off. The good news was we were able to buy for $7,000 a license with Getty for 100 images for a year, and when the website went live, Robert Reich tweeted about it, and all of a sudden we had to upscale to have 1 million views to the website, and that was $5,000 a year. So we ended up using the money, and it's been money well spent. But everybody who donated whether it was 5, 10, 15, or 25, all their names are listed on the website. And we continue, if people want to donate, that way you can be part of this history. And I want it to feel like a grassroots project. And when I agreed to do the book, it was also important to me, a lot of the proceeds from this book are going towards organizations that are helping our efforts to counter what's going on. And I want to say that, a plug for all these organizations. The first event I did for the book, it just happened to be Kismet. The ACLU asked me to speak at their Chicago keynote. I was their first woman keynote. No, good or bad. But I said to them, I will donate my keynote fee back to you. We just did a couple of events out in Portland, and the big event at night, the proceeds went to the Southern Poverty Law Center. The event during the afternoon went to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Done events for the Anti-Defamation League. I'm about to do another one in Seattle for the ACLU. We just did one in Shelburne that went to local Democrats. So doing things that the proceeds can help organizations and candidates and so on and so forth. So that part has been good. The other interesting thing I just want to tell you about the book. So again, I didn't have any vision that this would be like a big book or it would sell the way it has sold. But I said to my publisher, I want for the blurbs, I want at least one woman of color and one LGBT person to blurb the book. And they kept looking at me like, no one has ever asked this. But I really felt like in this era, the intentionality was more important than ever. And we got to a point in January where my editor said to me, we don't have any straight white men associated with this book. We had, Sarah was writing, and I really pushed for one of the experts. Sarah wrote the foreword. Samantha Bee was the first one who was like, oh my God, Samantha Bee's going to blurb my book. And Carol Anderson, who's an African-American woman who has another book out about voter suppression. She's amazing. Rebecca Solnit, who's like a dear friend in the resistance. And Michelangelo Signoret wrote, so we had no white straight man. I said, we should try Robert Reich. And so he was a one white straight man who blurbed the book. So that was, interesting. I think it's really important for all of us because of the way we've gone backwards. And if you want to look online, I just did an interview with Bonnie Urbe to the contrary about specifically what Trump has done on women's rights and how far back we have gone under him in such a short time. There are almost no women involved in any of the decision making in our country. We are back to Ronald Reagan era in terms of representation and pay for women. So things are bad. So we all have to be in intentionality to promote things. And I feel very strongly as well with all the racism that's happening in our country to go out of our way if we see something, but even if we don't see something, those of us who are white are privileged to be white, and right now with the everyday racism that I'm recording in the list, to do our part to be the kind of human beings we think our values of this country reflect. So 6 weeks ago, I started to do a podcast with the list. It's my most recent thing, and the reason I did that was actually shortly after what was happening in the southern border. I had been screaming inside my head. I was actually booked on a couple of MSNBC night shows to talk about what was happening to brown and black people. And I kept getting bumped by a shiny coin. I'd be an hour away from going on Lawrence O'Donnell. They'd be like, oh, sorry, Pruitt had a new scandal. Which has been really effective with Trump to throw these shiny coins in. Our media has not learned yet how to cover him. And so finally I just was like, what? I'm going to tell the stories that I think need to be told. And so the podcast just started in early June. I just did the 6-week. It's now number 51. It just moved ahead of Rush Limbaugh. So clearly there was demand. Clearly there's demand for the truth. And also the thing about our media, I'm not, we can talk about the media and what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. But I find each week that 80% of their coverage goes to 20% of the stories in my list, and a lot of the important stories, for example, the migrant children, that had been going on for almost 6 weeks before they started to cover it. And it was me and other people pushing on Twitter. When I was in Portland, I was having these huge events. I said, we all can help each other. I'm going to help amplify this. And there was one tweet I did that got 50,000 retweets. The people in the media started to notice it. Other people were doing the same. And finally, our media went down, and then within 4 days, there was the executive order. But until these stories get covered, he's getting away with a lot because they were that week in the Singapore summit, which oh gee, who could have guessed that nothing would be accomplished with Kim Jong-un, and it would be all stagecraft, and that Kim Jong-un would get elevated, and that we would look like yesterday's potatoes, or potato farmers, because that's where Kim Jong-un was when Pompeo went to visit him, and he said that we were being like gangsters, that he had never agreed to any of this. Hello. But our media keeps it's like Lucy with the football. They keep going for that football. So the idea for my podcast is also something Dan Rather had written, that people are working 2 to 3 jobs to keep up. They don't have time to always read the list or read the news. So I wanted to give them patterns that I see and give them the news that I think is important that the media wasn't covering. For example, last week on Independence Day, 7 of our Republican senators and 1 of our House members were in Moscow. It was, because of the time difference, the same day that the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee came out and said not only did Russia interfere with our election, they did it with the intent to help Trump. And it was much worse than was in the January 2017 intelligence report. And so within 12 hours of that, because of the time difference, on July 4th, there's our senators without the US media, without Democrats, in closed-door meetings with Russians, including Russians who are under sanction. And it was a holiday. Our media barely covered it. Those of us on Twitter were screaming about it. But those are the things that I cover, story 1 in my podcast and on the list. And the picture for week 86 is Senator Shelby with a camera in front of him and a microphone from Russian media, because only Russian media was there to cover it. And the photo for that week is from TASS. And if you've been following my book and my list, TASS is always the one that reports, it's a Russian state media, on anything to do with Trump and Russia. They were the ones in the Oval Office that took pictures when Trump met with Kislyak and Lavrov to say that he was so glad that he got rid of Comey, and it was such a relief for him because Comey was such a whatever. That was Russian media in our Oval Office and non-US media. So this has been going on, and it was sort of like if you wrote all this for a TV series, you'd be like, forget it, couldn't sell this. You couldn't have that Republican senators would be going to Moscow for the first time in decades. You couldn't have all that on Independence Day, that all this stuff could be happening and he could get away with it, that he could go today to a NATO meeting, insult Germany, and then he'll have a conciliatory meeting with Putin, who interfered with our election, and I'll bet you $10 the US sanctions we impose are gonna be gone. And worst case, we might even allow him to annex Crimea and not, impose sanctions on that anymore. Because one of the senators who came back said the whole thing was overblown, Ron Johnson, and that we should reconsider our position on Crimea. So these are the kind of things that, again, are not getting media focus because there's so much of a storm. And our media, spent days, again, the Super Bowl clock with the Singapore summit on his Supreme Court pick. It was like, please, this is not, Celebrity Apprentice. Cover the stories that need to be covered, but they still have not largely figured out how to do that. So I'd love to take your questions. We can talk about anything, and I think are we gonna try to
Maybe I can ask 2. It might be a little greedy.
What?
Okay. What do you think the Russians have on Trump and the Republicans? Because they have something. So what in your gut do they have on them?
Yeah, I really try not to speculate on things. I do believe that there was some complicity between them, but I think it's beyond the scope of our knowledge. What I try to do with the book is I view the people in the book as sort of characters in a novel. So I mentioned Lindsey Graham, for example, who early on was assuring our NATO allies and then did a 180, and along with Grassley in the Senate Judiciary Committee, their first criminal referral was against Christopher Steele. So it's like, what happened to Grassley? And then in my book, you'll see an article by the Dallas Morning News that talks about all the money that the Russians gave either to candidates directly or potentially through the NRA. So I don't speculate on that directly. I don't think that that's something that is within my expertise, but I do notice the way that some of the Republicans have shifted and the fact that the emails that they have are also of Republicans, and so it's, at this point, I would just say curious.
With the information that you just delivered to us regarding the Republicans in Russia on the 4th of July, would that impact Mueller's investigation?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah, I mean, Mueller is seeing all these things, and I'm sure he's noting what's happening. And it's noteworthy more broadly what's happened with the Republicans, and this is this microphone working? Yeah. Okay. Just trip down memory lane, like in the early weeks of the list, remember Jason Chaffetz? Jason was the first. He didn't just say, I'm not going to run in November 2018. He literally left town. And he had said he had some like screws in his ankle or something. And then he just left. And then it was Darrell Issa, and then it was Trey Gowdy, and then it was Paul Ryan. And these are people that are very high up in the Republican Party in the House. There's over 40 people in the House that are not running again. And you can ask yourself why, and the thing that is most, the shining coin that's the most evident is they realize their place in history for what's happening, and they don't want to be associated with it. But, too bad you are associated with it, even if you leave town like Jason Chaffetz and all the rest of them that have been part of this. And Gowdy has spoken out to his credit more recently, but most of them have not. And the same thing for the Senate, with a lot of them that have kind of shifted, and there's very few that are speaking out and effectively doing anything. So Mueller sees everything, and I think we have to worry as well with this latest Supreme Court pick what the impact will be on Mueller.
Coming up this way, is anybody close to me on this side?
I think you have some over here.
Okay, there you go, not coming up, I'm going this way then. So, there we go.
So, hi.
Hi.
Regarding Mueller, any ideas? I mean, I'm sure there's lots that he's going through at the moment and sorting through all the details and facts and such, but is it unusual for, I mean, I guess there's not really, I guess is Nixon the only precedent, or why the lengthy amount of time to come out with?
So following the list, his investigation of Russia is expanding, and we have to keep in mind there's been 23 or 26 indictments already, including Russians. So things are moving along quickly. When people ask, is he going to make it to 2020? I think there's three things that could potentially take him down, and Mueller's probe is one of them. And as much of an expert as I am on what's going on, like, who had heard of Papadopoulos before Papadopoulos, or Alex Vanderwick, who was already in jail and already out of jail? Paul Manafort is in jail. His trial is going to start 2 weeks from today. There are so many things going on. Gates is cooperating. Papadopoulos cooperated. Flynn is cooperating. Manafort's son-in-law is cooperating. Potentially Michael Cohen could be cooperating. And I think that's why Trump's Montana rally last week and his stuff today, I think he's just like, very losing it. And he's legitimately concerned if Cohen cooperates. But so that's one possibility. I always think of Mueller's probe as sort of the iceberg analogy, that we know a little bit about what's above water, but very little about what's below water. To me, and it might be my background as Wall Street, I've always been most concerned or most closely watching Deutsche Bank. And I've documented in this list that it came out, even before the stuff about Kennedy's son being his banker at Deutsche Bank, which might just be a coincidence. All these things might be a coincidence. But, the fact that Deutsche Bank would lend $300 million to Trump at a time when no other banks would lend to him. And not only that, they lent through not even the part that Kennedy's son was in. They didn't lend through the real estate group. The real estate group had said no. They went through their private banking group, which if you're in finance is really unusual. Also, a month before the election, Deutsche Bank lent Kushner $285 million, which he used to refinance a deal that he had bought from the Russian king of diamonds, Leviev. So all these things kind of come up, and you're like, wow, whoa, 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 and then it's like, the next week's chaos, lost. We know around the time that these were happening that Deutsche Bank was found to be guilty of money laundering for Russia. I keep an eye on him, and he's really concerned about Deutsche Bank. And anytime news comes up about Deutsche Bank, it's sort of like he tries to quash it or threaten the Mueller probe. So keep an eye on Deutsche Bank. But beyond the Mueller probe, I think there's two other things that could take him down. One, and this would sort of be karma, is the Me Too movement. And sort of what's happening with Cohen. It's not the cover-up, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. We know about Stephanie Clifford, we know about Karen McDougal, we know about Elliot Brody's mistress. who knows, now that we've got 4 million pages of documents and shredded documents, what else they're going to find in the Southern District of New York, especially after Cohen potentially cooperates. So that is just like a gold mine, and I think that's why Trump is also like losing. It's like, who have they, over this long period of time, co-opted, who have they paid money to that they didn't declare, who have they threatened? And the third thing, last summer I was picked for the Politico 50, and they asked me what story is not being covered that should be covered, and I said Cambridge Analytica. And if you read my book, it is all over Cambridge Analytica, and our media has totally not covered Cambridge. They're so far ahead of us. Carol Goldwachter, I forget her last name, in the UK was so far ahead on this. But I want to read you, this is like a year ago now. This is all, if you have the book, this is week 32, which is June 2017. I'm on page 175. I'm just going to read some things sequentially. These are the things that we've forgotten and normalized, but Mueller or somebody, in our Justice Department is looking at. Number 56, the Wall Street Journal reported that Deeproot Analytics, a GOP data firm, left a proprietary data set with personal information on nearly 200 million voters unprotected online where anyone could see it. Number 57, Gizmodo reported that the data leak contained personal information on about 61% of the U.S. population, including address, birthday, party registration, and views on issues for almost all registered voters. Number 58, the RNC paid Deeproot $983,000 in 2016, but much of the data leaked came from Data Trust, the GOP's primary voter file provider. The RNC paid Data Trust $6.7 million during the 2000 cycle. Number 59, the president of Data Trust was Johnny DiStefano, sound familiar? Who is now in charge of personnel for Trump. Number 60, Dallas County, Texas, a heavily Democratic area, said its web servers were targeted multiple times by Russian hackers. Number 61, of the 600 IP addresses provided by DHS as possible Russian hackers, 17 associated with Russia computers tried to gain access to Dallas servers. Number 62, Rachel Maddow reported that adjoining counties that were heavily Republican did not have any matches from the 600 IP addresses. What a surprise. Number 63, the Wall Street Journal reported on VR Systems, a software company whose products were used to check in voters in 21 of North Carolina's 100 counties. VR Systems software failed in heavily Democratic Durham County. Number 64, Durham County was forced to issue ballots by hand, meaning longer lines and likely depressed voter turnout. Trump won North Carolina, but the race was very close. So those are the kind of targeted things. This was even before we knew about the Facebook hack, and all the other ways that Cambridge Analytica was in the office of Trump's campaign, that they were getting money from Russia, that they had targeted, going back to 2014, Steve Bannon and the Mercers had sort of thrown out this idea of their Manchurian candidate, which would be a strong man. The idea of deep state, they had tested all this in 2014. They tried to do that with Ted Cruz. He lost, so they went with Shlomo instead. And, they helped him win. And there's, just so much evidence, in the early weeks of my list that came out that every week is chaos, so we forget. I say, it's Tuesday, there's 5 things today that could have been like in normal times. The lead story on CNN and cover of Wall Street Journal tomorrow, and none of them will even get covered. Like the idea that 7 senators went on Independence Day to meet with the Russians did not even make the New York Times the next day. They covered Alan Dershowitz in Martha's Vineyard on the cover page, but they didn't even report that. So those are the kind of things that we're missing. But Mueller has all this. He's not missing. It doesn't matter what they're covering.
I have a question.
Yes,
That's okay.
I just have that.
Okay.
So I'm curious. So Madeleine Albright just recently came out with an article stating that Trump is potentially smarter than he's being given credit for. I'm just curious. This is something that when I am having conversations with friends, we talk about. My inclination is, I don't know if it's talking about the strong man. I'm wondering if Putin is wondering, like, Trump makes such crazy. Okay, so like, how are you feeling? Is he smarter than what we're thinking, or is he like, wow, he's just?
No, she didn't say he's smarter than what you think.
No. Okay.
That was not her quote.
Okay.
She said he's smart. You know, and I think what I've noticed about Trump is he is, well, first of all, he cares about two things. From the time of his election till now, and if you look at it within the prism of this, he cares about staying in power and making money. And everything he has done falls into those two categories. I think he's very effective and had been through the time of his campaign in playing the media. And I think he's also really easy for somebody like me to read. Like when he gave that Montana rally last week where he had, I forget the number, 20 some odd false claims, according to the Washington Post. And was really just like, the fake Pocahontas thing and the Me Too movement. Whenever he becomes unwound like that, and it's happened several times, he knows something that we don't know about one of the investigations reaching him. And it might be the Cohen, and it might be why he said what he did about Germany this morning and their close ties with Russia. It was like a shiny coin to throw away from, oh, well, they're close with Russia too. In his mind, it makes sense. Whether he's like, there's different definitions of smart. I don't think he understands basic economics. In the early weeks of my list, he called Michael Flynn, when he was his NSA in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., and asked him to explain interest rates to him. These are the kind of things we forget. So I don't think he understands. I just think he just keeps pounding on this idea of others. And he has been doing that throughout, starting with the Mexican rapist. Anytime he's in trouble, he throws these shiny coins. The transgender military ban, the NFL protests, the burning of flags. These are all things to excite his base and keep the 35% with him. And then he'll do the things like he did this morning to change the subject, or the Singapore subject. So I think he's very good at controlling the media. But you said he's smart. There's a lot of people that are smart. I'm not, but he's also, dishonest and clearly dysfunctional.
I haven't gotten to the back. I'm headed towards the back for a teeny bit. So.
I think the garbage gets out. He wants to turn your attention.
I'm curious to know what your suggestions are for people like us who are so upset about everything, what we should do about it.
Yeah, so I get asked that every event all around the country, and I think it's even more disturbing. I have to say I felt like if you had asked me before the Supreme Court seat came up, I was like 90% sure he wouldn't make it to 2020. The fact that he picked somebody very purposely who will protect him on the Supreme Court if he's confirmed concerns me. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But I believe that this 2018 election will be semi-fair. There's been nothing done to improve, and there was a Friday in the least, it's like in week 30s, where 21 states were told that Russia tried to hack them on a Friday. Of those states, a couple of months ago, Secretary Nielsen was called before the Senate, and they asked her, have you given them information? And of the 150 people from those states who had requested information, at that point I think 20 had gotten security clearance to get information. They just met 2 weeks ago with Facebook and Google and other technology companies to ask for their help. They were given no help. So basically Trump has not acknowledged that Russia interfered in our election. Let's start there. So he's not done anything to direct organization, any parts, apparatus of the executive branch to do anything about it. So I don't think 2018 will be a totally fair election, but I think unless we can do something to take back the House, and I hope the Senate, then our 2020 election will be, like he likes to call and congratulate El-Sisi for getting 97% of the vote, or his friend Erdogan for, the stolen referendum, or congratulate Putin. Our 2020 election will look like that. I think in his mind, he believes that he now is ruling our country and he's going to pass it to Ivanka. He said jokingly several times to end the term limits. Who knows with this new Supreme Court, he's got 2 people on it already, possibly he could get a third, if we might have the end of term limit. So I can't stress enough, whatever you can do, we're only 120 days away from the midterms, and there are ways that you can help other places that need help. You can financially help, you can make contributions, you can go to an app like Swing Left, but I would do something every day to help
What?
We have to help other elections. Places where seats are up for grabs. Find a way that you can look online. And I tend not to be like, I can't tell you all what particular to do, but do something every day. Because literally, if we make it beyond this election, that will be, the stuff coming apart every day, like yesterday's story that barely got covered. He signed an executive order for the judges that serve the executive branch, the agencies, instead of having them be bipartisan and nonpartisan, that they can be picked by their agencies to control regulation. So that's more consolidation of power. It's happening day in, day out. That won't even get reported. The guy who got confirmed today to oversee our investigations, who, Benzie, this stuff, there's 5 of these each day. So I just think we all have to do something every day. And if you have friends in states, reach out to them, get them to, and whatever we can do in the short term to oppose this Supreme Court nominee. Lisa Murkowski is taking calls out of state. Bob Corker, I think, is somebody that you can go after. Bob Corker is speaking out about Trump. Flake, I think, is useless, but Murkowski, Collins, and make sure your senators are, trying to stall this out until at least after the midterms. I think we have a shot of taking the Senate.
I thought I might try to help answer that question.
No, questions only.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, how about this? What do you think of organizations like Indivisible Westchester, to which I belong?
Yeah.
They're swing left. There
I
are
imagine
postcards
swing
to
left,
voters, and do you think that at some point you could append to the list a semi-list of organizations that provide the answer, going from like minimal things like Wall of Us and 5 calls down to
Yeah, I mean, I think if you
yes.
Google and if you ask your friends, there are plenty of things, and I don't want to be the person that tells
Okay,
you which
sorry,
ones to do.
Then,
And the indivisible groups are obviously doing great work locally, but yes.
Oh, my question is, I thought, probably all the people in this room feel very grassroots and, trend left and all that sort of thing. So when he imposed the tariffs, I thought corporate America was going to get riled and, use whatever resources they have to prevent that, and nothing happened. What is that all
things have
about?
happened. So the things that, the Chamber of Commerce and the, of all people, the Koch brothers were behind Bob Corker's legislation that had Republican support just to make Trump have to go through them to impose tariffs, and McConnell wouldn't bring it to the floor. So McConnell has been the stop. And the things that Trump is doing that are just like a dictator, like he attacked Pfizer this week, and then Pfizer said they were not going to roll back prices. He attacked Amazon and tried to get the post office, U.S. Postal Service, to punish them, and now he's trying to privatize the Postal Service. And this was something 3 weeks ago with his new reorganization of the government. He's been going after Harley Davidson. These are things that a dictator does. So I don't think that our corporations are not standing up. I think they're through the Chamber of Commerce and through other things. There's just not, the Republicans have to be the ones. They control. Mitch McConnell, today they passed a small thing, but they should have brought Corker's bill, which had a lot of Republicans attached to it, to the floor. But McConnell is not going to do that. I don't know if McConnell is compromised. I don't know if, his wife in the early weeks became, he got a very plumb position in the Trump administration. McConnell, who knows what they have on McConnell? It's another question mark. I don't know why. But yes, all of these things, what happened, with NATO, these are all the centerpieces of the Republican platform. But again, I keep going back to, these things were what we were taught in high school history. These were we thought but they're norms. You would expect Republicans to stand up for their own policies, but for whatever reason, we don't know the answer to that. We know for some of the people we can speculate, they're not. So we, the people, we have our next big chance to get rid of some of these people.
They're loving.
Yes, and cowards, so yes.
Our two senators are Democrats. Nita Lowey's a Democrat. Elliot Engel's a Democrat.
Yes.
We need to know how we as individuals push back, get to Republicans. Some of them must be legitimate. Who are they? How do we swing vote? How do we swing districts in New York State to switch the House? What can we as individuals do beyond giving money and money to whether it's Southern Poverty Law School or Law Center or
Right.
or various contenders in contested districts, and where are these contested? I mean, you
So
know,
first of all, let me back up and say, Schumer is our senator. So we should all be on the phones. Like, I have to say, and
but he's already there.
but he has potential to become the majority leader. And people have asked me on events, would you support that? And my answer is no. I think we need a wartime concierge if we take the House and the Senate, running it. And right now, there's something big going on that we can call Schumer and be in his office and show up, even if he doesn't show up at his town halls, to demand that he does whatever he can, not write a New York Times op-ed, not suggest like Merrick Garland. This Supreme Court seat is very important, and he is the leader, so we do have something to do locally. And then beyond that, there are, I'm not gonna like throw out all the names, but you can like Google online, there are ways to help in other districts. There are ways to be involved. There's no magic answer for me to give you. Like, there are a number of seats around the country that are in play. You can Google and find out where. You can like go in over the summer and canvass, donate to the candidates. And same with Elliot Engel, who has anybody read Elliot's name in the news? Okay, so we should be on the phone with Elliot Engel. You're gonna potentially be a committee chair, but you're a Democratic leader of a very important committee. He has done nothing. That's totally unacceptable. Look at what some of his compatriots who are doing that are leaders of Democratic leaders of their committees. Look at Mark Warner's on TV, Schiff's on TV, in the media, making noise, doing things. I haven't heard a peep from Elliot Engel. So there's two for you right there. And then beyond that, there's politics or other ways to get involved, and be involved in organizations, indivisible locally or nationally. This is like well beyond New York, but there are seats in New York that are going to be in play. Yes.
Hi. I'm just curious about what your view is, because here we're sitting in Westchester, and we're all sitting in our little Twitter or Facebook little universe. Okay, so I'm just really curious about what's going on out there, because I can only see the parts that I see. However, what I don't see is people in person speaking, okay? I find that people, like even on Facebook, I share things on Facebook, no one comments. No one, I share important things, no one shares it, likes it. Now, okay, so maybe I'm not popular. No, but what I'm saying is, what is your sense of what I'm not seeing, and are people actually talking, and are people actually motivated? Because they're not talking in person. Maybe people in this room are people that talk.
So my view of like the population generally is there's 35% that got Trump. He didn't win the popular vote. About 35% of our country that is for his vision of America. The biggest demographic are high school educated white males. And his vision, starting with the Mexican rapist, is America in the 1950s, whatever that is, which means no gay marriage, which means no abortion rights, which means no black and brown people, which means women staying at home and not having rights. And there are people in our country that believe that. And I think that 35% is lost. But the other 65% is not lost. And those are the people, I think this election is not even, in a typical election, we would be talking about tax policy, or we would be talking about healthcare, or we would be talking, about any of the litany of differences that we talk about with policy. We're not talking about any of that right now. This is an election, and for us to spread the word, about saving our democracy as we know it. Because if we don't take the House and hopefully the Senate, we will never have a fair election again. So that, that's the way I phrase it. But, the good news is, like George's election last year, and even Shelley's election, like people that never show up for presidential elections came out and voted. So I think those are the people that we all marginally know in our lives that are not that politically involved, but are scared and outraged. And for example, the shift in women voters has been dramatic now. There's like a 33-point gender gap. Women favor Democrats by 25 points. The important thing is to get, so not everybody feels comfortable talking about politics, sort of like the Naomi Schulman poem, the nice people, but that doesn't mean that we didn't have 2 marches with over 1 million people showing up. And it doesn't mean that out of nowhere, that Move On and Walter Shaw put together a march with 750 events 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, where 70,000 people in LA, 50,000 people in Chicago, 30,000 in DC and New York showed up to march. So people are involved in expressing those, because, typically, we've never had in our country back-to-back marches of 1 million people. So people are engaged, and really the trick is then to get them to the polls. Now, in my personal life, anecdotally, I think 3 weeks ago was a turning point, the migrant children. I think it just hits people at a different level. I had people come up to me at the gym who were like, oh, you're like exaggerating your book, and they're like, oh my God, you were right. One of whom is an attorney who then headed down to the southern border. I think that is going to continue to come out and bleed for them week after week, because they've reunited 4 out of the 102 children out of, that they had to by yesterday, out of the, let alone the other 3,000 that we know about, and who actually knows what the number is. But that's such a real world story, and his base believes they're animals, so it's okay, but the other 65% of the country doesn't. The trick is, and with the young people too, to get them to the polls. But I think the 65% of our country is up for grabs. You have to remember, very few people in our country, when they say 90% of Republicans, in January of this year, only 22% of people considered themselves Republicans. It went back up to 25%, but it's sort of like a false narrative by our media. The majority of people are independent and, are ripe for the picking. We just need to get them to the polls.
Hi, I was very interested in hearing from the young woman over there. And I would say, yeah, we are all living here in a bubble, and it is a beautiful bubble that we live in. But you're right. But there's, if you look at the young women, I shouldn't be talking. I'm supposed to ask. I'm going to end up with a question. If you look at the young women that have been winning in races across our country, if you follow Eleanor's list locally in New York State or Emily's list nationwide, you'll see that the young women that are winning are of all stripes and colors. So that's the good news. But my question, Amy, is if we ever manage to get through these next few months alive, do you think that, I feel, maybe you do too, that we should be doing a lot of focusing on the states? Who are the governors in each state? Who are the elected senators and legislators?
Yes.
Isn't that where we have to be putting a lot of our efforts?
Yeah, that's starting to play out in the elections. But yes, getting people to the polls and getting them to vote as a check. And I think the polls are showing that will happen. I'd like to talk about things other than politics, about what's happening beyond like the 2018 election. Not to answer you, but I think, yeah. And Westchester, by the way, is half people of color. And Mamaroneck is 25% Latina. So there are a lot of like local things that we can be doing. The New York Times article a few weeks ago was about a woman from Mamaroneck who moved to New York City and took shelter on the Upper West Side in a church because she's afraid of being separated from her children and deported. So it's not that we can't do local things. It's just we have to make some effort to find those local things to do. But let's talk about some other subjects.
Awesome. That way and then come back here.
Yeah.
Either one. You fight it out.
I was very impressed with the fact that you did the book. I've been thinking about it. I'm a former librarian, thinking about doing a records work that would document what's been happening. Is there any number that you could say? I mean, I realize that he's functioning on chaos.
Yes.
He is the president that uses chaos. Is there some number that you found per day that he creates chaos? I mean, like if he wakes up today and he didn't see enough chaos, he'll create some more chaos?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on, Trump is successful when he's controlling the narrative. When he doesn't control the narrative, he gets really scared. There was one point in week 67 when he went on Jeanine Pirro's show on a Saturday night, which was so unusual because it's a low-rated show. That was a week after Rob Porter and all these scandals kept breaking and he had lost a narrative. So then he'll do something grandiose, like the transgender ban, like the Singapore summit, to distract our media. So I think when he's scared, like the Montana rally last week really caught my eye. He was just so unhinged. And there's no upside for him attacking the Me Too movement when he's got a 25-point gap with women and has lost white suburban college women. I think he's just, when he's unhinged, tries to throw torches. That's what he knows, to change the subject. But what's happened, and the reason the list grew from 9 to 40 to 120, is because he staffed up his regime. And they are all doing the same thing. His turnover within his senior aides is 61%, which is the highest in history. And to put it in perspective, at this time, Obama's turnover was 14%, George W. Bush was 5%. Half of our executive branch is unfilled. And a third don't even have nominees. So basically, one person is running our government and making all of the decisions. And so the people that he does have that are still involved with him are deconstructing their agencies from within. Like Mulvaney took charge of the CSFB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. First thing he did was put in a budget of 0. DeVos got rid of regulations that protected people of color. Information disappears from websites. They take it down. Information from HUD, took down information for people of color, took on housing or LGBT people. So information disappears, but they all are doing that work of deconstructing their agencies from within, deconstructing the deep state. It is like a cancer. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had any ideas or thoughts on this gerrymandering thing that Obama and Eric Holder are working on.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to result in anything, or what their ideas are on that?
I think she asked about gerrymandering that Obama and Eric Holder are working on. I think losing the Supreme Court seat, if we lose it, is going to impact that severely. So I think we have to, in the short term, be on the phone with Chuck Schumer, be on the phone with every senator we can and every friend we have that's a senator, that's friends in Maine or in Alaska or in Tennessee, and do whatever we can to stop this. Like, Schumer should hear from us every day. Like, he has to do whatever he can. We have to stop bringing knives to gunfights like we do. I mean, the Republicans have not won an election legitimately since, or won the popular vote without voter suppression. So we have to really fight this, because the answer to your question is, once we lose that seat, that's the end.
I was just wondering what you thought about the administration's relationship to Fox News and Sinclair and that whole scenario.
Yes,
and
I
also,
wanted to talk about
have
Sinclair.
they impacted you or made, have you felt any impact from them?
From
Being
Sinclair?
how visible you are, has anybody, you're so vulnerable out there. I kind of worry about you.
Thank you. Well, I'll answer your second question first. It's actually in my introduction. But the week of Charlottesville, I had tweeted, I was so upset about the Daily Stormer had run a story about Heather Heyer, the woman who was murdered. And I didn't want her mother to see it. It was like I was calling her a slut and all these terrible things. She was like dead. And I was just, if I was a mother, I would not want to see that story. So I tweeted to GoDaddy to take their website down. It got retweeted, and then GoDaddy responded to me that night. And they said we gave them 24 hours. Around 3 a.m. my phone rang. And I picked up my phone, and then I turned back on my phone, and Daily Stormer, the white supremacist, had doxed me. They put my home phone number and my address online. And so people said, I called the police, and the police were like, oh, you're the 10th person that's called, which was very sweet. Like, people online were concerned about me. And so that week I did have an armed bodyguard sleeping outside our house and came with me to the dog trail and everything. But other than that, I'm like at the Eleanor School that courage is easier than fear. I get attacked on the social media all the time, and I just deal with it. Your other question was about Sinclair, which is a really important question. And to me, Sinclair is more scary than Fox News, because Fox News, you know what Fox News is. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, other than net neutrality, that the FCC did right away under Ajit's control, was they are trying to turn back rules from the 1970s that will allow Sinclair Broadcasting to enter 72% of homes. And so that's been in my book, and the media has only really picked up on Sinclair a couple of times when they had that big video that showed the propaganda. But the problem with Sinclair is they come to you, it's sort of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. They come to you as your local station, so you have no idea. So the one-two punch of net neutrality, and so people in a lot of states not having access to information, and then their only information is Sinclair Broadcasting, but it's not Sinclair Broadcasting, it's KZOU, your local network, who has in their mandates that Boris Epstein has to be 9 times a week on, that you have to use the words fake news, that you have to say that these migrant children are like animals. I mean, these are all things that I'm recording in the weekly list. That to me is more scary than Fox News. And they said that they're going to try to do programming like Fox News now. But people won't realize what it is, because again, it's like your local network. So that is part of like the deconstruction of the media and access to information that we need to be worried about. Not to sugarcoat it, but yes.
It seems like you might agree that the Kavanaugh nomination is binary, that sort of it goes one way or it goes the other way, and if it goes the wrong way, we're all in a lot of trouble.
We're in trouble.
Bob Corker in particular, he was very vocal this week, 97-2 and 88-11 on the 2 NATO votes.
Yeah.
He has an opportunity to literally play hardball on this.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that with enough noise from enough people, Bob Corker could be encouraged to actually go out there and put his agenda up there and say, unless A, B, C, and D all the way through double Z, you're not getting that
I
vote.
think to me he's one of my top 3 targets.
Yeah.
Because he is one of the few. He's not running. He just lost love for Trump. Trump has attacked him, told him he's no better than a dog catcher. And he's one of the few, he more so than Flake. Like Flake likes these flowery speeches and then he does nothing. Corker has put forward bills that just haven't made it to the floor, and he spoke out today about what Trump did with NATO. I think Corker's a possibility. I think we should focus. I don't know, Murkowski said outwardly yesterday in an interview in an Alaska newspaper that she is considering her call volume, including out of state. Corker hasn't said that per se, but if you know anybody in Tennessee, you can look through your Facebook lists and find anybody in Tennessee, we should be targeting Bob Corker. Absolutely. Oh. You'll be next.
Hi. I think it's safe to say everybody in this room gets their news from reputable sources, and everyone's got Trumpsters in their lives. Just wondering if you have any tips on how to handle people that are spewing, the fake news and the lies, and aside from unfriending people on Facebook, 90% of my family's now unfriended. I walk away wanting to pummel the crap out of them. What do you do? Or can you give us any tips on how to handle people like that?
Yeah. And you're not alone. One of my sweetest friends from high school, I just had my high school reunion up in Massachusetts, and she was like, I fucking hate this guy. I never heard her say fucking like that. She was like going on and on. He's evil. He's da da da. Again, I think there's 35% of our country that just does not like the progress that we've made, and I think those are lost causes. And even though our audience here is homogeneous, my hope is with this book, and I know a lot of people who have given it to their conservative dads for Father's Day. This book, I'm talking to I'm preaching to the preacher, the choir here, but this book is history. And I'll get the argument, oh, well, it's quoting a bunch of fake news. One of the top sources for information is the Wall Street Journal, which is owned by Robert Murdoch. I think the Washington Post is probably number 1, but Wall Street Journal is definitely in the top 5. And New York Times has dropped, but NBC News, Politico. If you believe all of these are left-wing agenda and stuff, but this is just cut and dry factual information, and the lists are just cut and dry. There's a link to them, and so suggesting they read this book or read the list or listen to my podcast about what is actually happening.
Will I get a discount if I buy a dozen?
People have said that to the guys. I don't know if they report, but the basics. And when it first came out, I did all the media hits and got the real challenge. This is just HBO was at my house 2 weeks ago. They're doing a documentary on the truth. And I'm basically narrating a lot of the documentaries and reading what happened in those weeks to set up what's happened. But this is just the dry truth. And there's 100 pages of triple column footnotes. And you can draw conclusions or not draw conclusions, but these are just facts. These are things that are deconstructing our democracy. And some of what he's doing is sophisticated and it's hard to understand. And there's some people that are just like, oh, he's authentic and it's great and and I love that he's like, but a lot, and there's just, I think we have to buy that a third of our country is just lost. But this is not meant to be, this is not like, MSNBC coming to you at night. This is not opinion, this is just like, and the lists are just dry facts. I might order things to put them together because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Like there was a week, I'm sure you didn't even notice this news, but because it wasn't well covered, because there's so much chaos every week, there was a week, about 5 weeks ago, where the then president of Mexico was supposed to come up and meet with Trump. They still hadn't come to the White House yet because Trump kept insulting them about the wall, and you're going to pay for the wall. And he berated the president of then Mexico, and so that meeting got canceled. And then that Thursday, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico resigned. Got very little fanfare. We have 38 positions, major U.S. ambassador positions that are unfilled, including until last week South Korea, including Australia, and Mexico now because she resigned. So I would order those together just to let people see the context of the frustration, what's happening in our State Department, that 8 out of top 10 roles are still unfilled. But those are the kind of things that, the dry facts, you can only, yes. I think we could probably take one more, or one or two, she wants us to put, maybe we'll take her.
I have one here and where? And this young lady here. Yeah.
Okay, hopefully this is loud enough. First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us. So you've spoken a bit regarding Trump's pick of Kavanaugh and also his remarks, joking or not, regarding the abolishing of term limits, that kind of thing. So I was wondering, considering the difficulty of sifting through ad hominem attacks and inflated rhetoric, whether you think there is a probability of long-term or even semi-permanent changes after, that you're cataloging in the list after the Trump administration, because it seems as though he's navigating an administration or a regime that will last beyond him, whether for 8 years. And so I was wondering, what do you think those changes would be if they do exist decades after this day?
And they will exist decades later, so that's a good question. And so, like Rebecca Solnit's comment of the act of remembering is itself an act of resistance really speaks to me. This is like a trail guide back to normalcy. These are all the things that we've lost in a week in the chaos that we've forgotten about, all the executive orders, all the picks that shouldn't have been there, all the things that we've done to deconstruct our executive branch and our legislative branch, and now he's going after the judicial branch. So I think the damage is going to take, depending on how long he's in, again, years or decades to turn back. Like the stuff that we've lost, like in the early weeks, this is the week they had me read HBO. Like I just, these are some of the things, and the assault on the truth is also important. But for example, in week 11, as he was taking office, without explanation, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention canceled a climate and health summit scheduled to take place in Atlanta. The State Department statement of apology for past LGBT discrimination was scrubbed from an official website. Trump signed an executive order reinstating and expanding to an unprecedented degree the global gag rule. Trump banned EPA employees from providing information to reporters on social media about news contacts or grants. Trump froze EPA grants. So these are just the kind of things he did in the first week. So we're gonna have to read through all those things and start again. It's going to take years, if not decades, depending on how long he's in. So I think that's just reality. This is bad stuff.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for all you do. It's remarkable work. Thank you.
Yeah.
The question, though, is let's talk about the economy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I ask that you take off, put on your banker's hat, essentially, right? The old maxim is that people vote their pocketbooks, right? Is there an opportunity here for the 35% to maybe feel some pain given the direction of the economy with the instability of global tariffs and trade wars that are coming up?
Yeah, I don't know if that will be in time for this election, and therefore, and the people that realize what's happening to the economy and the tariffs are the people that are probably not this 35%. Those are mostly high school educated white men who just will read his Twitter feed and say, oh my God, unemployment's so low, but not realize like the damage and what he's doing and how that's going to impact them.
But they likes their bourbon and motorcycles.
Yes, and you know we probably will. I've been worried about this. He does not understand like Econ 101, and anybody who's left around him is just a sycophant that's just going to agree with what he says. You know, so his trade policy, or anybody who knows anything about economics, is horrendous, and it's going to tank our economy. You know, you can only threaten Harley Davidson and Pfizer so many times. They're still going to move jobs overseas. They're still going to be, when they go to buy your whatever, things are going to be more expensive. I don't think that's going to happen in time for this election. And I think the people that want to believe him are going to believe him. But I think it's very dangerous, and I would sell your stocks.
Amy, you are brilliant. Thank you for coming to the